Welcome. Jared has already told you I'm Reena, and I kind of wear two hats. One is my finance professor hat that I've had for a long, long time, but I also wear the hat of vice provost for faculty at Georgetown, which means I'm sort of responsible for about 1,000 different faculty that we have at Georgetown. And one of my big responsibilities is the rank and tenure process. Okay? So you're not thinking about rank and tenure right now, and you shouldn't be. You'll do the right things, and you'll get there, and everything will work out. But I think it is time for you to think about what your research agenda should look like. How should you be thinking about your research agenda? And that really does start at this step. I think it's become more and more important in business schools and in finance that you're going to work on an important issue. It matters to somebody. So think about, is this important? Is it interesting? Does anybody care? Does it matter to somebody or the other or not? Because there's a lot of criticism on higher education now that we're doing research that's not relevant, that doesn't matter. I mean, everybody doesn't have to be doing stuff that only matters today. It could matter in the longer run, but something to think about. It's got to be interesting. It's got to be important. In your 2-minute elevator pitch, can you describe and say something about, you're going to have the chance to meet the panelists here in a couple of minutes. Can you tell them what you're working on? Why is it important? And who should be caring about the work that you're doing? Right? So I think about two kinds of projects, and both are worthwhile, absolutely. One is what I kind of call tweaking projects. They're more about the literature has already said quite a bit, and now you're going to add a new dimension to it, and that's all right. So you're extending the literature. And then the other kinds are a little bit bolder, that the literature really hasn't touched on these issues, and a new issue, new way of approaching. After the financial crisis, lots of big, new, bold issues that need to be addressed. So both are good. We get very caught up in it's statistically significant, but we've also got to pay attention to, is it economically significant? So that's why my little cartoon here, that sometimes you get so caught up in the nitty-gritty, you kind of forget the big picture. So you got to think about that. And be very clear about what is your contribution. How does your contribution add to the literature? A lot of papers will get rejected because there's nothing wrong with the paper, but there's not enough of a contribution. So how do you come up with topics? A lot of times PhD students or others will ask that question. How do you come up with ideas for research? And after a point, it will become natural. They just come. In fact, there'll be too many ideas, not enough time to work on them. But initially, it's a little bit of struggle. How do you come up with ideas? So you've got to read. Lots of journal papers, lots of papers all over the place. And so as much as you read, new ideas will come up. Have discussions with your faculty at your school, at other schools, with your colleagues. Talk amongst yourself with other PhD students at your university or at other places. And obvious things like attending seminars and brown bags and workshops and conferences like the FMA. As Dave said, go to the sessions, go to the receptions also, because some of that kind of conversation continues in the receptions also. So then a lot of times people will ask, somebody has come up for tenure and they didn't get tenure even though they had so many top-tier articles. What happened? And one issue that tends to come up is co-authorship. Whom should you have as your co-authors? And it's perfectly all right to have many different kinds of co-authors. You can have your colleagues, other PhD students, all the way to advisors. But when somebody asked me about somebody didn't get tenure, what happened? How is it possible? They had 5 top-tier journals, articles, and how did they not get tenure? Well, all of them were co-authored with the advisor. So that becomes a problem. You have to start, I think, thinking now, It's great to work with senior faculty. You learn a lot from that, but you also have to figure out how are you going to prove that you can do it yourself. You can execute all the steps yourself. And if you're working with junior faculty, that's all right. With your colleagues, that's all right. But obviously, if all of your publications are with your advisor or only with senior faculty, then questions will get asked. So as you're going through your dissertation, as you're thinking about projects, think about your work, think about work with other PhD students, junior faculty, advisor. The whole spectrum is perfectly all right. But the extreme where it's only work with your advisor can be a little bit of a challenge. And of course, your advisor is going to ask you the question that's being asked in this comic here. There's no substitute to hard work. You have to work really, really hard. Life is going to be about your dissertation, about your projects. You just have to work very hard. I've seen lots of people who might have gotten best training, and then when it's tenure time, they're not getting tenure. And I've also seen tons of people who might not have gone to the highly ranked schools, but the person is doing amazingly well. So that persistent, that hard work, there's no substitute for that. And so if your advisor asks you what you did this week, what you did this year, why is the advisor successful? Because they're just working. Again, I'm not suggesting don't have a life beyond that, but in a way I am. It's just a lot of work. Research is hard. You don't get the payoff right away. With teaching, it's a little bit simpler. You get the teaching evaluations at the end of the semester, you get a pat on the back, and it's very easy to feel good, the students love you or whatever, but research is just hard. That pat on the back is not coming all the time. It's very difficult to get that. Lots of failures and some successes. So, but you just have to be persistent. You have to be at it. And I really do believe if you keep working at it and you're really hardworking and you're focused, you're going to be successful. So that bullet point about your work or her work, if it's all with senior faculty, and especially if it's an area in which the senior faculty are very well established, the question will come up. Is it your work or is it her work? Whose ideas, who's done the work, all of that. But if you've done something that's on your own or with junior colleagues, then people will not ask that question. Then the whole portfolio will look very strong. Again, I'm not at all suggesting don't work with your advisors or don't work with senior faculty. You learn a lot. There's a lot to learn about the publication process, how to reply to referee reports, how to structure a paper, how to write a well-written paper. When you write papers, obviously the intro, the abstract, the conclusions, those are extremely important. And then you want to make sure that you get feedback. So, in the business world, you talk about networking. In our world, also networking is really important. Not for socializing purposes, but by networking, you're going to come up with contacts, and people will provide feedback on your work. And that feedback is really important. So for those purposes, the networking aspect, whatever you want to call it, but it's really networking. The more people you know who are doing similar work, maybe they'll provide feedback to you. And so the receptions, or certainly the sessions, you want to be there. And feedback really does make a paper much better. So you're presenting your work here today, you'll be presenting it at conferences, there are going to be discussants, you're going to go present at universities, and you're going to get feedback that really strengthens a paper. And it's so important to do that before you submit it to a journal. There are only so many journals. You don't want to send something in way too early, because the journals are going to get ticked off and you move on to the next one. use any opportunity for brown bags, seminar presentations, any opportunities to get feedback on your work. That's extremely important. So Dave said, while introducing Jared, he said, Jared has done all this work in corporate finance, right? In so many different areas of corporate finance. At this stage in his career, that's terrific, that he's done so much work and is known in many areas of corporate finance. But I think you have to think a little bit carefully. How much do you diversify versus how much are you concentrated? You want to be known for something. In the next few years, you want to get known for some type of research that you do, some area of work that you do. So I would want, be a little bit careful early in your career. Later on, it doesn't matter, and you can be a Jared later on, or any of the people sitting here, they've done work in many different areas. But initially, you want to be a little bit careful, but you want to be known for something. What is your area? Somebody asks you, what is your area? Again, you're not thinking about tenure, but when the letters go out for external evaluators to evaluate your work, if somebody knows this part of your work, and somebody else knows this part of your work, and somebody else knows about this part of your work, that's a little bit fragmented. So early in your career, think a little bit about diversification versus concentration. You want to be a little bit careful about not spread out in too many different areas. There'll certainly be an occasional project that will come along that doesn't tie in with your basic interest. That's all right. But if you just have one here and one here and one here, that could be a challenge. You do want to graduate, not too early, not too late. So, but you can decide which options you choose. Have a really good life, see friends, and eat better, sleep more, get more exercise, do all the right things, or graduate. So it is about, there's a lot of work as a PhD student. And it doesn't end there. Actually, your life becomes busier and busier. Ask any of these people on the panel here, and your life gets busier and busier, but the PhD really prepares you to step into this career. And it's a great career. I keep repeating to my colleagues who sometimes forget, being a business school professor, you can't beat it. You really can't. Now I see the whole university and other departments and all of that. Our profession, being a finance professor, it's a pretty good gig. So do everything so that you can be successful and you can be sitting here at the table in a few years. Thank you.
Yeah, we can address them to Reena, and then other people can jump in. So many hands. Oh.
So my question is when you're thinking about concentration to get known in a particular area, does that, you talk about something sort of fairly broad, like, for example, if you're in asset pricing, fund management, for example, or is it very specific, as within that sort of category, you're known as the guy who uses this methodology or has pioneered this particular approach? Is more specific always better at this stage?
I wouldn't say very specific, but if you're known for corporate governance, broad enough within that certain areas of corporate governance, if you're doing work with institutional investors and corporate governance. So it doesn't, you just can't be too narrow either. But other panelists might have something to add.
I guess I would agree with you. That was advice that Jay Shankin gave us as PhD students. He said you want to be known for something. You can't, you don't want to be super narrow, but you can't be so broad. And there's a little bit of strategic thinking about this as well, because at some point people are going to have to write letters for your tenure case, and if you're so broad that nobody is really, nobody can say, oh, I've read everything that she's written, it's really great, and yet they're having to somebody saying, well, I'm familiar with this work, but I'm not really familiar with their other stuff because I don't work in that area. It gets tricky. And I think that the hard part as a PhD student and then an assistant professor is that you really want to, you're excited about research and you want to start all these new projects because that's the exciting part of what we do is like the new discovery part. But you start to get spread too thin. And I always ground myself by some advice I got very early from Wayne Michelson, who's a mentor of mine at the University of Oregon, who I was complaining as first-year assistant professors are wont to do about the final round at the journal on my dissertation. And I was tired of this. I learned everything I was going to learn. I wanted to move on to these new projects, and they were making me do this last thing. It was dotting I's and crossing T's. And Wayne just listened patiently until I kind of spent myself in my little rant. And then he just looked at me and he said, "This profession rewards people who finish." And it's very true. And it's very hard to finish stuff if you don't dig deep into an area and really know that area.
Yeah, to follow on with what Jared was saying, I think it's, for me, I have to focus on one thing at a time to be able to finish, because if you're juggling 3 or 4 balls at the same time, it's too easy when you get frustrated with ball number 1 to move on to ball number 2, and you just don't finish. So I always have, I want to finish a draft, submit a paper. I have an immediate goal that I have to finish before I can move on to the next thing. When I was in graduate school and studying for exams, I used to say, if I get studied for 6 hours, I can go and have a bag of peanut M&Ms. So that's the kind of guy I am, and I sort of took it to working on papers. You have to finish something, and then you can go out for a beer, and then move on to the next thing, or whatever sort of incentive you have. But it's really important not to get too juggled.
I think there's also an efficiency piece, right? If you're working in one area and you know the literature in that area, you know the data sets in that area, and if you're working in a different area, a whole different area, different data sets, different literature, it's just going to take a lot more time.
The other thing that Jared said that resonated with me was the letter writing. When I get asked to write a letter for a tenure case, and half the work is on affine term structure models, which I know nothing about, and half the work's on behavioral finance or analysts or something I know something about. I'll write about the papers I know something about, and then I'll say, I know nothing about the rest of that stuff. So that's the kind of thing, if you get spread too thin, it's like, think about the letter writer, right? Will the letter writer know your whole body of work? And if you can't answer yes to that question, you're putting yourself somewhat at a disadvantage in terms of getting letter writers.
And just looking ahead to that sort of process of getting tenure, in addition to the letter writing, you have to write a personal statement that says what your research agenda is. And it's a lot easier to make the case that I care passionately about issue X than to say I care passionately about issue X, Y, Z, A, B, C, D, E, and F. I mean, at some point, so I think it makes it a lot easier for you to write that. It's important.
I don't follow that advice, by the way. I'm all over the place.
But you're embarrassed.
Maybe that's what tenures are.
So I have a question with regard to Jared's and Brad's point about finishing a project, but also related to Reena's point about getting enough feedback before you submit to a journal. So is there sort of a rule of thumb that you use when to write time to submit? Because it seems like you can always get more feedback, and there are always people who will tell you that there's something more you need to do. So what's sort of the right sort of rule of thumb?
I got an answer. So when you're presenting your paper and you're talking to people about it, when you stop hearing new things, time to send it in.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I think there are a couple of things. So if I was to look on average how many times I present before I submit my paper, and I think I did this for my students once, I think it's minimum 8 to 10 times. Because the first 4 or 5 times you keep hearing stuff, at some point the comments start repeating themselves. And so if you address that, that's great. Now, from an efficiency point of view, what do you do? So, different projects in different stages, I think is the answer. Because if you're doing, you're getting hard to collect data, it takes you a year, you do the analysis, you're presenting, 3 years are gone. And if that doesn't make it, now what do you do? So, if you need to finish at the same time. It's important to have multiple projects at different, so, you might be data gathering in one, doing the analysis in the other, being on the road on the third, so that come 10-year time, you have, 6 papers or whatever you might need that comes together.